What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, where we go through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, the Lions have signed another player to the roster. This is an outside linebacker, Reggie Gilbert Jr. So let's get it started.
Way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, and we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we got some Detroit Lions news to discuss. Man, we are still gone probably for about another week, but we will be back soon. However, we have some Lions news, and today I'm here to report that as the Lions have added some outside linebacker help, and I think they still have 1 roster spot remaining. They have another spot open if they want to. They've been making some cuts recently, but now they've been making some signings, cutting Rakeem Boyd, bringing in Michael Warren, the running back out of Cincinnati, and now bringing in an outside linebacker for some more competition. This is a former Green Bay Packer that has a few connections that could definitely help him. But let's move back to the college days before we start to get into the NFL. I did watch some film on him, so I have some clips I can show you. But let's go back to the college days. So this is an outside linebacker now in the NFL. But before, he was a defensive end for the Arizona Wildcats, where he played 5 seasons. And statistically speaking, he was there for 5 years. Statistically speaking, he had pretty good production. And really, the latter part of his career, towards the end, junior year, senior year, his stats went way up. He had some really strong numbers. But he was in a 3-3-5 kind of defense where he played on the defensive line at 6'3", about 260 pounds. So he wasn't that big, but yet he was playing the defensive end position in basically a 3-4 front, but in a 3-3-5 defense. Of course, that's the nickel formation. So he played on the defensive line in that defense. And at the college level, it was fine. It worked. But at the NFL, because of his size, it kind of pushed him to outside linebacker. And because of that, he's still pretty raw at that position, because in college, he was a defensive end. At the NFL, they're like, yeah, you're 260. You could probably play the outside linebacker position. It's very similar to what we're doing right now with Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara. Our defensive line is a little bit bigger. The Lions drafted Lee McNeil. They draft Levi Onwuzurike. They trade for Michael Brockers, right? They bring in all these bigger defensive linemen. They say, you know what, Trey Flowers, Romeo, we're going to make you outside linebackers because you're not that big, but you can play the outside linebacker position, still pass rush, still help us against the run, show some of that athleticism off, and potentially drop a little bit into coverage. 2 connections that Reggie Gilbert Jr. has with the Detroit Lions coaching staff right now. The first connection is Dom Capers from the Green Bay Packers, who is now kind of a senior defensive assistant for the Detroit Lions, helping out. He's going to have an influence on this defense. This is a first year for Aaron Glenn, but he was a UDFA signed by the Green Bay Packers back in 2016. Dom Capers' final year with Green Bay was 2017, so he was there. There is some crossover. Now, he didn't play a lot in that defense, but there is some crossover. The second connection then is the Lions' new defensive line coach, Todd Wash, who was with the Jacksonville Jaguars before joining Detroit, I think for like 8 seasons. And he was slightly with the Jacksonville Jaguars back in 2020 as he was signed off the Arizona practice squad to Jacksonville. So there's 2 connections that he has currently with the Detroit Lions coaching staff that, of course, could help him, but it's probably a big reason why he was signed by the Lions. Going back to his college days, and you look at his pro day numbers, like I said, he had pretty solid production, and his pro day numbers weren't bad either. He ran a 4.79 40, which isn't bad for his size. His 10-yard split wasn't great. If he was an defensive end, yes, he's very explosive, and that's why it made sense in college. But in the NFL, it's like, oh, he's a little bit smaller. So on obvious passing downs, it makes sense to put him on the line. But at the edge position, he's got top-end speed. He just lacks some of that burst. Not really separating himself from anybody. If anything, he's below average in terms of burst. He had like a 1.7 second 10-yard split, 33-inch vertical jump, and he had 24 bench press reps. So not a bad pro day showing whatsoever, and he had pretty good production, but he ended up going undrafted. And it was a big transformation for him because he went from 3-4 defensive end because of his size to 3-4 outside linebacker in his first year with the Green Bay Packers. So Dom Capers, when he brought him in, that was the adjustment he had him make. Now, like I said, he didn't really play with Green Bay during that time, but that was kind of the adjustment there. And he was ultimately waived from the roster but added to the practice squad because they saw potential. And eventually, we got to see some of that potential play off. And that came in 2018 when, statistically speaking, pretty good numbers. He played in 16 games, and he found more of a role this season because they needed edge help. So they said, okay, let's see what Reggie can do here. So they let Reggie play a little bit. He played in 46% of defensive snaps. And in those snaps, he racked up 38 combined tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 18 pressures. Now, he did show a little bit of a mix between getting on the line and playing off the line, playing a 2-point stance to getting in the dirt. He showed a little bit of a mix and some versatility there, and we'll get into that in a second. But solid stats. He did have 6 mixed tackles, but 18 pressures isn't bad. However, that was kind of the last season we saw big production out of him. As in 2019, he was ultimately traded from Green Bay to the Tennessee Titans because they had depth, right? The Green Bay Packers then had depth. They had Clay Matthews, they had Nick Perry, which, by the way, he got to learn from those guys. But they had depth, and they just didn't really need it, so they decided to trade him away to the Tennessee Titans. With the Titans, he played in 27% of their snaps, where he had 1 sack, 22 combined tackles, and 4 pressures. His stats definitely went down, but he did play a little bit in 2019. And then most recently, as I mentioned, in 2020, really didn't find his way on the field. But he did have that slight connection with the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is pretty important. He is 28 years old, so not that old, but at the same time, not super young either. Not that old, though. He was just in college for a long time. He was in college for 5 years. So it makes sense that he's now 28, even after being in the league for only 4 seasons. One thing that I think is important to mention when you talk about injury history, he does have a little bit of injury history, specifically with a knee injury that he has dealt with. So it's something to keep an eye on. Let's film some of my initial takeaways from watching him. We'll probably do a film breakdown at some point, but just some of my initial takeaways from watching some of this film. The first thing is, of course, the scheme fit, and it's there, right? A 3-4 outside linebacker, to me, is where you're going to see him, if you made the team, a majority of the time. That's probably where he's going to practice. The Trey Flowers, the Romeo Okwara type of role, and he does have the ability to play both on the strong side and the weak side, I believe, because he has enough speed to set the edge, and he can use some of that strength to play on the strong side of the field. I think he can play a little bit of both sides. But to me, he'll be a 3-4 outside linebacker that in certain specific occasions can push in on the defensive line. It seemed like his best fit on the defensive line in a 3-4 defense was on obvious passing downs, when you knew it wasn't going to be a run play, because he's attacking downhill, he's allowed to use that speed, and that's where he gets his advantage. He's not super explosive, but he does have some quickness, so he can use that to his advantage on obvious passing downs. However, against the run, he's just simply bulldozed out of the play by some of those bigger offensive linemen, especially the interior offensive linemen. So for him on early downs, you got to play him at the outside linebacker position, and you don't want to be playing 3-4 fronts where you're pushing him against the tackle, against the guard, because he's just going to get pushed out of the play. He doesn't have bad strength, but he just doesn't match up size-wise. He's not a speed rusher, and he's not a power guy either. He's kind of just a very balanced player when you watch him, which isn't a good thing, but it's not a bad thing either. The scheme fit is definitely there. I can see the role that they're going to use him for, right? And that's kind of what I think his role will be. The next thing that I love is his motor. And it sounds like a boring thing to say, oh, he's got a good motor. Like, what does that mean? To me, when I look at motor, I look at guys that play through the whistle, but also guys that are making plays and getting back into place. Making plays that they shouldn't be. Accounting for tackles that they shouldn't account for because they're fighting back into play. The motor is always running. The energy is always there. And you also have to mention how good he is in their locker room, how good he is for a locker room. He's gotten a lot of praise for that, specifically for Mike McCarthy. So no locker room issue you're going to have here whatsoever. Also, like I said, the versatility. His size does give him some versatility to line up in a 2-point stance to get out in the dirt. And you can do that with him. He does have that 3-4 background playing 3-4 defensive end. So in obvious passing downs, it works. Early downs is probably not the spot you want to put him unless you're going to try to bulk him up. But for our scheme, 3-4 outside linebacker will work. And that brings me into the next part. And this is being able to drop. Can you drop in the flats? Can you drop in short area? And that's what we're going to ask of Trey Flowers, Romeo Okwara. And they've done it. They've done it a little bit. It's sort of new to some of these guys, but they've done it. We've seen the athleticism for Flowers to be able to do that. But you ask yourself, can he do that? Can you drop it all? Not going to get man-to-man coverage assignments. He just hasn't done that. However, and like I said, his background is defensive end. However, with his athleticism and size, he can drop. He can do those responsibilities that you ask him. And sometimes he can drop 10, 15 yards down the field, which is pretty impressive. He's got a pretty nice feel. My favorite part, though, is the change of direction. He seems to be pretty light on his feet. He lacks some of that explosive burst, but he is pretty light on his feet to change direction, adjust to a quarterback running out, adjust to a scramble, and also on read options, things like that, being able to set the edge. Pretty light on his toes, but he definitely can drop into coverage, especially in those short area situations, and it's very beneficial because when they leak out tight ends, they throw out running backs his direction. That's what he's going to have to do. That's his responsibility. We don't need you to man cover a tight end down the field, but if we can ask you to leak out into the flats, then you can play that 3-4 outside linebacker position. When we need man coverage, things like that, we'll have different guys that we go to for that situation. But there's definitely some coverage ability there. Like, I watched him drop 10, 15 yards, and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't expect to see that in this game. But his size gives him versatility to kind of do that. Play on the line, stop the run, pass rush. He's a very balanced athlete, if you know what I mean. Like, he's not, overly big. He's not too small. He's just a very balanced athlete, which works well for this type of scheme. And he does have some pretty good quickness and bend. I think bend is the biggest thing here because it makes him a little bit quicker, but also bending around the edge, it makes him low, it gets him low, and he's able to get good hand placement. He can get good pad level because he has really good bend with his athleticism off of the edge. So his bend is really important. It helps him get around, and it makes him look a little bit quicker because while I don't think he's super explosive off the snap, he can bend around some of those tackles, and if the tackles can't bend, then they're going to have problems. And that's where, he can kind of rip through, get underneath, and get to the quarterback and bend around the edge. He does have that bend in his game. And like I said, that kind of translates to good pad level consistently for him. He played the defensive end back in college, but at the next level, he's moving to outside linebacker. Had experience, you can see the improvement, you can see it in his production, but he is a little bit raw here. Specifically, I don't see a lot of pass rush moves. I don't. And he's had a lack of experience. Hasn't been on the field a ton. Aside from 2018, hasn't really played on the field that much. So there's a little bit of lack of experience, and there's also not a ton of pass rush moves. He has improved. Mike McCarthy hit on it. He has since he came into the league, and obviously they liked some potential there, and he's improved. He's gotten better. He's worked with some good players. But he still is a little raw. So guys like Trey Flowers, Romeo, they're going to really help him. I think specifically Trey Flowers, I really think he'll help him as he's going to work with some of these young guys, Austin Bryant, Julian Okora, Charles Harris. He's going to really add competition, but he should help him and add some of the small things because he doesn't seem to have a lot of nuances to his game, a lot of the little veteran techniques, but he does move better. He's much smarter now. He's improved, but I think he's still slightly raw at the outside linebacker position. Again, it's sort of new to him with not tons of experience. His size allows him to be versatile, but not to the point where you can use him however you want, whenever you want. I don't like him on the defensive line early downs. To me, it just doesn't make sense. He's just pushed out of the play. He's not so quick that he's going to beat guys off the line and run plays. He does have good top end speed. He runs down well, which helps him run down, chase down quarterbacks, but he's not got that crazy great burst. For him, it just doesn't make sense to put him on defensive line on early downs unless you feel like you got a really strong advantage, or unless it's a 3-4 front where he's pushing side and you're looking more like a 4-3. At that point, I could see it, but you don't want him going, against guards, tackles, because they're just going to move him off the ball, especially if they're rushing the football. If they're passing the ball, it's okay because he's playing downhill. Then he can use his pad level, try to use some of that quickness. But on early downs, you're not really sure what you're going to get, run or pass. And if it's a run, that's when he gets pushed out of the play. So for him, if he wants to play early downs, that's fine, but you got to play him outside linebacker. That way he just sets the edge. You try to play him on a defensive line and you're only playing 3 defensive linemen, unless you're making it a 4-3 look because you're playing an underset, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. He just doesn't have that size and he can be pushed off the ball. He's not really a speed rusher. He doesn't scare you in that area. So it's not like he's got so much raw athleticism that you just need to tweak a couple things. But in the NFL, it's hard to do that, right? But he does have enough athleticism. He can run down quarterbacks. He can run down flats, but his burst isn't fantastic. So out of breaks, it's not really great. He does have a pretty good feel for angles. I've noticed his angles are really good. David Bakhtiari said it best here when he says some guys win with their athleticism because he's not going to win with his athleticism. I hate to say he's just not. What that means for him is that experience is everything. Getting opportunities is everything. He said he's getting smarter, and you could see that his role went up, and he got better. Year after year after year, there was improvement there until recently he just kind of haven't found a role. But for him, it's all about getting reps, opportunities, and learning from guys, and learning the small things, right? And he's improved upon that. That's why his numbers got up, but it tells you there's more room to improve here. He's not simply relying on his athleticism because he can't. Now, as a run defender, he's not a bad run defender. Early down, 3-4, outside linebacker as a run defender, he's pretty good because he can set the edge. He's got pretty good length. He's got solid power, and his run angles are really good. So as an early down run defender, he's pretty darn good at the outside linebacker position. I would say that's probably where he's at his best. At the outside linebacker position as a pass rusher, it can just be hit and miss at this point. Like I said, he's not going with athleticism, so he's got to do the little things really, really well to get back to the quarterback. Set up stunts well, set up pass rush moves to attack an offensive tackle. He needs help around him, right? So as a pass rusher, he's a little bit hit and miss. I mean, when I look at the Lions roster right now, and you look at Charles Harris, look at Okora, I mean, there's clearly guys with more upside as pass rushers, but in terms of balance, connections, some production, and size that gives you the versatility, I think it makes sense that the Lions would add him. And, he could serve a little bit of role because he has improved. He's still raw enough where there's improvements to be here. He's got enough athleticism where he could be very dangerous off the edge. It just isn't all there yet. He's still pretty raw as a player. He's not going to wow you with his speed, but it's not bad either. And it allows him to do multiple different things. The versatility's there. The connections are there, and some production is there as well. I like the fact that he's rejoining with Dom Capers and he's rejoining with Todd Wash, and I also like the 3-4 outside linebacker that he has had some experience there through the years. It's not as raw as he was coming out of the draft because he's had some experience, work with some good guys, but I can clearly see the scheme fit here. I mean, it makes sense why the Lions brought him in, and now it's going to be competition for Austin Bryant, Julian Okora, and Charles Harris. But keep in mind, Austin Bryant, how many injuries he's dealt with. Austin Bryant, not there at week 2 OTAs. So for a guy like Austin Bryant, you talk about, okay, what are we getting here? We're not completely sure. Julian Okora, I love the upside. I think he could be really good. I'm excited for him this year. But again, you can never have too many pass rushers. Plus, Julian, we still haven't seen him on his field a ton. And Charles Harris has been, it was a high draft pick, but since then he's been really just hasn't lived up to expectations. Let's just keep it simple. When they signed him, they said get to the quarterback, but it's clear in the deal that they gave him what he's done in the past. You wouldn't have got that deal. Edge rushers don't come cheap, and he did, right? So my thing is that there's a lot of question marks at the edge position. He's not a guarantee, a lock to make the team, but there is some, okay, I kind of know what I'm going to get here. I kind of have some experience with this guy. I have connections. We understand a little bit what we're getting here, more than maybe what we're getting with some of the other guys. You can see the upside. Okoro, Julian has tons of upside. I'm super excited. I think he's going to be really good. But Harris has upside, just hasn't really lived up to it yet. Maybe this new scheme helps him. Austin Bryant, injuries, not being there for OTAs or just not participating. Maybe he was there and he just didn't participate. But there's clearly question marks. You know what you're getting from Trey, you know what you're getting from Romeo. Now you want to figure out what we're doing behind that. And because of the connections and some versatility and the scheme fit, it makes sense the Lions would make the sign. This feels like a Dean Marlowe for the outside linebacker position. We signed Dean Marlowe. Who knows how high the upside is because there's athletic limitations here. But you also know that he can play. Here he has some connections. You know what he can do. You kind of know what you're going to get. Still is young enough and raw enough, though, for the position for there to be an improvement. But you can't say that he has the highest ceiling of any pass rusher. I mean, I think you're just lying at that point. There's a reason he went UDFA. I feel like a lot of draft picks are based on upside. What can he become? But with the improvements we have already seen, to me, it's all about experience for him. So Reggie Gilbert Jr. is a Detroit Lion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.